If you're an early stage Web3 founder, apply to our award-winning accelerator program, Basecamp, at outlierventures.io/Basecamp. We write your first $50,000 check and give you access to 200 mentors, including many of the leading Web3 founders, and a network of 1,000 of the world's leading investors and exchanges. We've helped over 30 startups from 15 countries from all around the world raise $130 million in growth funding and can help you fast-track product market fit and, where relevant, the launch of your token economy. I'm really happy to welcome Joe Lubin, co-founder of Ethereum, founder and CEO of Consensys. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Jamie.
So I've been really looking forward to this one. We actually did try to get you on the podcast. Technical problems my end. We failed.
Aren't we now on the podcast?
Well,
also?
Technically, that's right. Exactly. So we are both on the podcast and streaming live. Thanks for correcting me on that one. So let's get straight into it. So you're one of the few people that can say that they've built a multi-billion-dollar network in this space that's actually being used at scale and growing. For those that don't know, I mean, it'd be amazing. You'd have to be under a rock to not know Joe. But in quick summary, Joe co-founded the Ethereum Network and Foundation with Vitalik Buterin. And the job of that foundation is to make sure infrastructure works fairly and independently, and really set the precedent for how Web3 tokenized projects structure themselves. You almost simultaneously founded Consensys, which at its core, and I'm sure this is a shifting definition, but last time I checked, venture production studio and blockchain software development consultancy for decentralized applications, enterprise solutions, and developer tools. Is that still how you say it?
It has definitely evolved over the years. Should I jump in and try to clean that up and make it current? So we started about 5 years ago, started a year into the Ethereum project. As we were moving on the Ethereum project to launch version 1 of the Ethereum platform, I started Consensys to essentially figure out what it would mean to build a decentralized application, what it would mean to wrap a company around a decentralized application, and effectively grow or open up an ecosystem. So we did start as a venture studio. Instead of believing that top down we could architect a new global digital economy with these decentralized applications, it made more sense to just bring a bunch of entrepreneurs and technologists into the mix so that we could explore the solution space, essentially. And so Consensys grew organically with the initial mission would have really been to just continue the vision and mission of the Ethereum project, foster adoption for the technology. And as a result, we ran lots of experiments. We invested in lots of projects. We incubated lots of projects. So in a sense, we were a software company ourselves. We were a venture studio. Some of those projects spun out. And we also started getting lots of calls early on from different kinds of organizations that asked us to explain blockchain technology or explain Ethereum. And so we were this strange hybrid that was making investments and managing our portfolio and building software ourselves. In the last 18 or so months, as it became clear to everybody, or even before that, hey, we do have an ecosystem here. It has opened up. Consensys played a significant part in that, and now so many organizations, including Big Four, other major consulting companies, major banks, are streaming into our ecosystem. And now we needed to, as we had done over a few times over the last few years, re-architect ourselves, retool ourselves so that we could effectively compete in this essentially new IT paradigm that was starting to really take hold. So some of the projects that we built in that venture context have gained real traction and had started to coalesce into what we think of now as a blockchain stack. So these are our Ethereum client project, which was called Pegasus. We now call it Quorum. It's a blockchain node that runs on the public Ethereum network or private permissioned Ethereum networks. Essentially, the foundational element comes in a Java flavor and a Go flavor. On top of that, we have Infura that can handle 10 billion queries per day on an extremely busy day. It also has forthcoming a sort of private component enabling private connectivity to the mainnet or just private networks. On top of that, we have in our codifier commerce and decentralized finance group, we have middleware software and a bunch of component software for payments and digital asset issuance and full life cycle and workflow and compliance and a bunch of other things. And on top of that, we have both a consumer interface, MetaMask, the wallet system and browser system on mobile, as well as a B2B aspect to that, where our MetaMask team is working with a bunch of product and other protocol teams to enable access to its 1.25 million users for these different projects. And so all of that was housed in a company called Consensys AG, a Swiss-based entity that owns a bunch of operating companies around the world. And we recently took the projects that compose that stack and spun them out into a company called Consensys Software. So a very focused, coherent, integrated software product company. And Consensys AG, which we're calling the Mesh these days, is still managing our portfolio. So managing, incubating some companies, making new investments. But that stack, which is now growing into a much more fleshed out operating system, is resident in a company called Consensys Software.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. Not only have you been innovating in technology, but you've been innovating in different commercial structures about how you work alongside this open public network, and we'll get into some of those elements a little bit later. And as a founder, how you manage the complexity of an evolving market and also being a first mover. So some of the reasons why I really wanted to get this fireside chat is really your contribution to the space and your continued energy. I'm very envious. I don't know what you're on, Joe, but it's definitely working. So on the one hand, as this co-founder of Ethereum, you've introduced what promises to be a foundational layer to the internet at large. I think you refer to it as a trust layer, but you've also birthed this new financial bottom-up system that's kind of native to the web and could very likely outlast either of us, and probably will. But it's also, if you look at Ethereum and ETH generally, probably one of the best investments anyone could have made over the same time period in any asset class. And I say that not from a kind of speculative perspective, but in that process, you've managed to make a whole ecosystem of devs and innovators financially independent. And they've come back, reinvested billions of dollars back into R&D and completing this Web3 stack, which is both on top of Ethereum and also beyond or adjacent to. I'm very nervous about giving some stats now because I know you're going to correct me, they're going to be wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. So Ethereum still dominates its share of smart contracts, 79%, dApps 82%, daily active dApp users more than twice the closest competitors. You referenced some of these kind of ventures or innovations that have come out of Consensys before. MetaMask, 4 million plus downloads, $10 billion value transferred on chain, 130K BSU downloads with Hyperledger, 20K faster Ethereum infrastructure, 60 plus global clients and partners. Do you ever kind of just pause to reflect on all of that? I kind of get the feeling that you don't. You're just kind of on to the next thing. But I mean, that's kind of a huge contribution.
I don't feel the need to pause and reflect all that much. And there's just so much to do on so many fronts. So we generally move forward because there's always cool stuff that is exciting and better than what is in near in the rearview mirror. So some of those stats sounded pretty good, but they're really quite small numbers. Sure. I guess the relative numbers are okay compared to other protocols, but we are really in the early days or the foothills of a massive ascent in front of us. And so, I hope we remain energized, because not only do we have a lot to build as an ecosystem, but I think there's going to be some interesting and different kinds of resistance that we'll encounter, especially as the world transforms into a sort of new world order, or new world disorder for a little while.
Yeah, and I think let's get straight into that mission piece. So normally when I have people on the podcast, I do my desk research and try to figure out their background, stuff that people might not know about somebody, to contextualize them as a founder. So I'm pretty sure I did know that you had this role at Goldman Sachs, I believe in their private wealth division, as VP of technology. What I didn't know was, prior to that and prior to Ethereum, you actually started out as an academic researcher engineer in a very wide range of fields, from machine vision, artificial neural networks, autonomous road vehicles, I believe at Princeton, and then some commercial firms. And I think we were on a panel recently, and the conversation came up about AAs, autonomous economic agents. That wasn't what the panel was about, but it's what you and I ended up speaking for most of the time about. So it'd be great to just talk about this kind of unknown part of your career or background at Princeton and beyond.
Sure. So I ended up doing a junior paper and a thesis on AI. It was kind of a boring kind of AI. The junior paper was a survey of different exciting techniques from the perspective of 1986, so like 1,000 years ago. I was lucky enough to be hanging around the cognitive science laboratory at Princeton, where some cool connectionism work was being done. This was one of the names for neural networks research back then. And so I ended up working with an advisor and built a tool for teaching students Lisp programming. So that was AI from his perspective. But fortunately, there's a guy named Charlie Rosenberg who was hanging around, who built this backpropagation based project that processed a bunch of text, and it was just text, and it sort of understood how to take some jumbled text and turn it into words. It was just a 2-layer backpropagation network. Back then, we had like simpler architectures. The architectures have evolved significantly since then. But we had no data and no computational power. So the problems you could solve were really toy problems. What he did, though, was he hooked it up to this speech synthesizer, which he tuned to sound like a young child. And so he had different time slices of learning of this network. And it sounded like the child was babbling and then starting to slightly form some words, and then starting to string sounds together into words, and then starting to string sentences together. And because of the synthesizer, it sounded just so incredible that this neural network was learning language. Of course, it wasn't. It was a trick. But that basically that and just hang around and reading all the papers in the cognitive science lab, that's what sort of captured my interest. And I spent the next 10 years doing work in robotics, machine vision, different kinds of neural networks. This is back in a time when you pretty much had to write your own backpropagation code, or there was a group at Boston University at the Center for Adaptive Systems. So I thought that they did some brilliant work. A guy named Stephen Grossberg was the head of that effort. And so I built a lot of simulations. We built an autonomous road vehicle simulation and taught a car to drive through that environment. And I moved on to a company called Vision Applications, where we actually built a little model four-wheeled robot and had DSP cards and a vision system. And so I sort of built the nervous system and a bunch of the visual object processing and navigation.
Very cool. And we'll kind of circle back to this a little bit later with the concept of AI Lego and how that might combine with money Lego. But if we kind of come back to this mission, because as you alluded to earlier, the idea that this is we've only just started. I think a lot of new people entering the space kind of feel that they're really far behind, that they've kind of missed out on everything. And I think we'll be probably comforted to hear by somebody like you saying it's really not got started yet. We've got a huge way to go. So I've heard you describe this in different ways. And again, that's just as a byproduct of evolving with the market and evolved thinking. I do the same. The one that seems to be consistent throughout is this idea of a trust revolution. Could you explain the trust revolution and in the context of this mission, the thing that motivates you?
Sure. So the context in which we all find ourselves embedded right now is one of a breakdown in trust structures on the planet. I think that breakdown has perhaps been happening for a small number of decades or forever. We as a society have done such spectacular things, and in order to organize ourselves to do spectacular things, you need essentially command and control systems or governance systems or decision-making systems or consensus formation systems. And for all the periods of history where communication was slow and expensive, it made decision-making slow and expensive. And so we needed paradigms that were efficient. And so the paradigm that is most efficient in that situation is top-down command and control. And we see that throughout society and the military and government and companies, et cetera. But if you do have the ability to communicate instantly and inexpensively and make decisions amongst groups virtually instantaneously, as we can do in some of these decentralized protocols now, then you maybe have an experimental ground for trying out new systems, new paradigms of organization. And I think it's fair to say that the systems that we operate under in our society have just enabled spectacular things across the world, but they are also easily exploited by lazy people or corrupt people or patient, well-resourced actors. And so as a species, as a society, it would be really nice if we iterated and got to the point where we had governance and decision-making systems that represented more people or more actors in the context more fairly. And so I'm excited about the fact that Ethereum and many other protocols represent this new paradigm, and we're in the early days of exploring how to build an architecture for the planet, the systems architecture for the planet. So at the foundational layer, we have decentralized protocols, and the more decentralized it is across more identified dimensions, the more difficult it will be to improperly manipulate data on the system or to corrupt the system or co-opt the system. And so 2 projects currently, Bitcoin and Ethereum, are considered sufficiently decentralized by the SEC to have their tokens not be considered securities, but also sort of set the standard for what a layer 1 system should be, a foundational system. And this is enabling us to move from a world of subjective trust, subjective decision-making, centralized decision-making, to a world of automated and objective trust. And so that foundation layer is hopefully going to grow in capability, usability, scalability, privacy, confidentiality. We've been working on that for years and have made tremendous progress. Still lots of progress to go. And that trust layer is enabling right now a new financial plumbing for the planet. So it is democratized in the sense that anybody can get in there and use it permissionlessly. Anybody can get in there and build something new. And like magic internet money Lego protocols, snap it onto something that somebody else has built, or snap them into exciting assemblies. Anybody can get in and fork somebody's code and improve it, or do something other than improving it, as we've seen. And so it's about building a new, more trustworthy, IT architecture for the planet, and that's the Trust Foundation, which enables the financial layer, calling it the open decentralized finance of late. And on top of that, we're going to have other layers with other functionality that the financial plumbing layer enables. I would argue that if we can build that financial layer broad and deep, and the agility, the speed of innovation in that space is just astonishing. It's so exciting what's going on there. But if that thing grows strong, then just like the United States, where I would argue that it is the largest, strongest, most vibrant, most agile economy, I would argue that it is that because it's sitting on top of the broadest and deepest financial system by far on the planet. And so if we can build out, and it's largely getting built on Ethereum, other protocols are doing some things around the edges or connecting into Ethereum to avail themselves of the DeFi protocols. Once that matures, then it will serve as a massive magnet on which other aspects of the economy will be built.
I've heard you describe kind of one of the outcomes or goals of this as granular governance, or kind of improved localness in the effectiveness of governance. And recently I saw you did a tweet, I think it was at the beginning of COVID, which was effectively saying, to quote, "As builders of decentralized systems had hoped we'd have more time before the world hit another crisis of the scale, but as a legacy economy has entered the zombie-like days, we can accelerate a brave new world." So do you also kind of find part of the motivation, on the one hand, you're from the existing financial system, you work with it through Consensys, but do you find what you're doing almost as a form of protest as well, and software as a protest?
So I definitely don't think of it as a form of protest, creative expression, perhaps, and mostly technological innovation. So the internet protocols developed, and on top of those, web protocols developed, Web 1 protocols, Web 2 protocols. So it's a lot of people standing on the shoulders of giants, building something with more functionality or building something better. Web 3 protocols, decentralized protocols for trusted transactions and automated agreements, like on Ethereum. Payments, decentralized or distributed storage, decentralized identity, decentralized heavy computation, decentralized bandwidth. All of those things will be incorporated as part of the World Wide Web, enabling us to build an increasingly decentralized World Wide Web. So that's just evolution to me. Certainly there was an element of protest in the Satoshi white paper. And I guess advancement is a dialectic. So you get somewhere and you realize, hey, it's not the ultimate system. And you figure out ways to either fix it iteratively or try something new, explore the solution space over in this corner and see that, maybe, getting back to AI terminology, maybe you've found a local min here in the energy surface, but over here you do some experimentation, and there's lots more to explore, and you can build much better systems. People complain a lot in our ecosystem that it's insufficient to subserve all the world's use cases at scale in September of 2020. But again, it just has to be iterative. We need to try things and understand where they're working and where they're insufficient. Where they're insufficient in terms of scaling or usability, that's where we know we can apply our effort. And so it's going to take a bunch of time to build sufficient infrastructure so that we can onboard more and more use cases. So we start with the lower hanging fruit, like cryptocurrency payments, and we gradually get more and more capable until really smart people build cool stuff on different layers that have been built up that enables what they do.
So as a first mover, and this is a nice segue into, of course, the much anticipated Ethereum 2.0, as a first mover, how do you what are the benefits and what are the downsides of that? Bringing new technology to market, evolving a network.
So we were not first movers; we were early movers. There were lots of movers over the last 10 years. I do think that over the last 5 or 6 years, things really got started as smart contracts became a thing. Even before Ethereum, there was Nick Szabo's version of smart contracts, and there were some platforms that had sort of hardwired smart contracts, but not a virtual machine. So NXT enabled people to just change the whole platform and add some new functionality, and you could call that a smart contract. But I really feel like smart contracts roughly came to prominence with Ethereum, and so we're 5 or 6 years in. Ethereum's early advantage is apparent in so many ways. One is a regulatory advantage in that Ethereum and Bitcoin arrived on the scene before regulators were watching, and so via different mechanisms, we were able to distribute our tokens broadly and equitably, which is critically important for the success of decentralized protocols like this. If you're a great team right now with a great technology, you need and you have designs on being a layer one protocol, you really need massive decentralization to claim that you're a layer one protocol, to claim that you're a new trust foundation. Otherwise, you're kind of a pretty small platform and potentially corruptible. And so we were fortunate enough to be able to frame our token as a utility token and get the excitement of the community of developers, entrepreneurs, users. A project right now, even if it's excellent, needs to incentivize its community to be excited about the token. And usually the way to do that is to say, hey, this token is going to appreciate by the agency of this group over here. By definition, that's a security. This is Matteo Leibowitz's distribution quadrilemma. It's not my construct. And so regulators are watching. So pretty much all the tokens need to be either introduced into the world in a convoluted fashion or are really just going to be seen as securities so that they can't be distributed broadly and equitably. They are being called VC coins. Oh, sorry, Jamie, or or professor coins, and
or worse names than that as well.
Yeah, or worse names than that. And we've seen that some good projects, really good teams, have struggled to really establish themselves as sizable projects. So the the new projects are really quite small still compared to Ethereum and Bitcoin, and the Ethereum ecosystem developer core is just so much bigger and so much faster moving and is drawing so much talent, especially DeFi. DeFi is a massive moat that Ethereum has. Now, so you build this thing that looks like it's a trust foundation. It's not sufficiently big or sufficiently decentralized to really put all the world's wealth on it right now, but it's growing to make that potentially possible at some point in the future. Once you have something that looks attractive like that, then you attract the people that think, hey, we can build a new financial infrastructure on top of that foundation. And so the liquidity in terms of value that's on the platform, that draws in more liquidity. It draws in the best and the brightest. So we've got the best and the brightest building out at the protocol layer. And so that early mover advantage for Ethereum is just an astonishingly large advantage. For Consensys, we have an early mover advantage also in that we built some of the foundational components in our ecosystem. So whether it's an Ethereum client called Quorum, or whether it's Infura infrastructure that powers many billions of transactions and other things other than transactions like reads that an application needs to do. Whether it's our codified tooling, middleware, and a bunch of different components, or MetaMask that currently has about 1.25 million users in both the web version and the mobile version. Those projects, especially having coalesced into a blockchain stack and evolving into a blockchain operating system, have set us up as a platform, effectively, or a set of platforms. And being a platform in this space gives us the advantage essentially of an infrastructure provider. And so we can relatively agilely observe what's going on in the space, like the DeFi space, and put out a service. So Impura does that regularly. They're going live with a bunch of things soon. Some things around gas, some things around decentralized storage or distributed storage. MetaMask is going live very soon with a pretty exciting service in the DeFi space, and we'll follow that with a handful of other exciting services.
So with these two, you mentioned DeFi, and there's kind of this love-hate relationship or dynamic between DeFi and Ethereum and DeFi because it's just so dominant.
Can you explain that? A love-hate relationship between DeFi that's built on Ethereum?
Yeah.
And Ethereum?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that if you speak to people in DeFi, there are of course frustrations that it's not truly democratized because of gas prices. On the other hand, you have people that aren't interested in the experimentation that's happening in DeFi and are frustrated that it's kind of clogging the network.
Sure. So that's like saying that I have a love-hate relationship with my modem in 1989.
Which is true.
Which was true. Yeah, very good point. But I love my modem because it enabled a whole new world that I could explore and experiment and build in. And I think we need to understand that technologists are always bumping up against ceilings. So for many decades of the development of the information technology world, hardware developers and software developers have built amazing new things, doubled the speed and size every very short period of time. But the software developers and other hardware developers are always poised to max out the available memory or CPU or bandwidth or screen size or transactions per second. And so we're going to see that. We're going to see all of these decentralized protocols be somewhat disappointing to people who choose to be disappointed by them for years or decades, just because we're going to want to onboard more and more complex use cases. When we start trying to do AI related things or big data related things that touch on blockchain systems, it's going to get even worse. And so what we do need is to keep building, to keep bumping up against many different ceilings, because those ceilings basically show us how we fail or how we get maxed out. It shows us exactly where we can apply our attention and grow the system or make the system more capable. And we've seen that dynamic evolve beautifully in the Ethereum space and other blockchain spaces. We've had a bunch of layer 2 solutions being developed and iterated, improved. Several of them are online right now. Several more are coming online. Ethereum 2 itself is effectively a new from scratch technology that respects Ethereum 1 and will soon onboard Ethereum 1 into Ethereum 2, creating a pretty smooth evolution between the Ethereum 1 technology and its upgrade, Ethereum 2. So it seems to be a natural dance, ideally towards continuous improvement.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing at Consensys, because of course, DeFi is just one part of that. I've at least heard you in the past refer to it generally as financialization So I understand it's kind of as more of a spectrum anywhere between CeFi and DeFi. Could you talk about some of the areas where you're seeing the most innovation happen, and perhaps elaborate on that spectrum of everything from CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, all the way through to the more exotic end of DeFi?
So I think I use the term financialization pretty narrowly. So if you have a certain decentralized protocol, then you could run it and it would work fine in a certain context where everybody's trusted. But if you want to bring it into a bigger context, where a Byzantine context where there are actors that aren't trusted or that you don't know, then you have to create mechanisms like consensus mechanisms that facilitate trust in that context. Financialization to me refers to creating tokens of value that can be used for incentivization mechanisms to enable mechanism design. So you're rewarding people for sharing their resources or behaving in certain ways on different kinds of protocols. Consensys has a lot going on. So we've got a bunch going on in DeFi, decentralized finance. We've got a lot going on enterprise usages of the Ethereum technology. And we're seeing convergence increasingly. We started with this notion of convergence. We called it our convergence thesis or convergence hypothesis. And that's really why we started early on building tools for the public permissionless mainnet, Ethereum mainnet, but also whenever we could, applying those tools, the Ethereum client, decentralized applications, wallets, etc., into contexts that were private and permissioned, because we felt that just like the internet and web technologies, all these protocols, these technologies need to mature in terms of usability and scalability and privacy and confidentiality to enable more companies back in the Web 1 era, Web 2 era, to make use of those technologies. Companies in the 80s were much more comfortable, in the 90s were much more comfortable on intranets. And that's for companies right now, for more legacy economy companies, that's where they are. They're building private permission systems, and we've built a bunch with companies or with consortia. What we're seeing now is with DeFi, with other kinds of applications, with a protocol called Baseline that we built in collaboration with Ernst & Young. We're seeing mechanisms that will enable legacy organizations to get comfortable putting some sort of functionality or some sorts of use cases on public mainnet Ethereum. And so with Baseline, companies can keep their information perfectly secure on their side of the firewall, and through zero knowledge proof techniques, they can sync up agreements, keep them in sync in real time, or sync up business processes. They can tokenize elements of business processes, so tokenize the money that's used in payments, tokenize the commodities that are traded, tokenize the invoices that represent some aspect of that business process, fractionalize the invoices, securitize things. And so we're going to see a very exciting convergence between sort of the legacy world and the purer public permissionless world. I think of it as revolutionaries getting out ahead and showing what's possible, and then evolutionaries following relatively closely and sort of fitting those new capabilities into what they need, and ideally coming up with new ways of doing business or interacting.
So there's another form of convergence which we share, which is this idea of convergence of blockchain and AI. I know you guys were a big contributor to the EU blockchain forum, and you published a paper on the convergence of the blockchain AI. And to circle back to the topic that I asked you at the beginning, your kind of background in the AI space. So do you think that DeFi or money Lego needs AI Lego, and how will that play out?
So I think there's a really rich potential intersection between the two domains. AI, as I said earlier, AI requires a tremendous amount of data, and it has, to the concern of some, turned into what could be considered an arms race. So if you have access to enormous amounts of data and enormous amounts of computation, you can do pretty astonishing things.
Either as a state or a platform, right?
Yeah, so whether it's the NSA in the United States or China government or Facebook or Google or potentially some other projects, they have enormous advantages. We saw recently with GPT-3 the kind of magic that could occur, and what appears to be the kind of conceptual learning, sort of generalization mechanisms that can be built strictly from data, strictly from internet-based or internet-acquired data. And so it would be wonderful if this arms race, which is not going to end or stop in any way, there's no way to stop that sort of innovation, but it would be wonderful if it was a broader, fairer, flatter playing field. And I think we can do that. I think we can get to the point where people understand that their data is valuable, and you can incentivize people to protect better their financial information, their medical information, or just the signals that are streaming off their lives, off their bodies all day long. These things can be collected, can be formed into different feeds, can be stored in large corpuses. Projects like IPFS and Filecoin are configured right now to facilitate the storage and handling and usage of massive data sets. And if we can turn that data into commodities that can be traded fluidly for value for lots of people, it enables people to either go out and take pictures or collect other information and monetize it. And the way to facilitate that is to build data markets. If we have data markets, and if people understand that certain kinds of data are very valuable, as opposed perhaps to these more superficial stuff that Facebook might easily collect, if we have mechanisms like self-sovereign identity and personal data lockers, such that we can interact with applications without giving up too much personal information, and we can use our personal information and we can de-identify it and share it with a research study, or get commercial benefit from it by sharing it with somebody who's willing to pay us for it to use in their classifier, or to have us interact with something so that they can add metadata and improve the data. These sorts of mechanisms can enable us to create a platform that could facilitate very broad competition in the AI space. So if we can make these oceans of data broadly accessible and help people understand that that's where your data should go, and that you should have full granular control over how it's used, how you allocate access to it, I think we will have a much healthier evolving context for AI. And you pretty much need blockchain for that. You need to tokenize and have fair systems, and you need things like self-sovereign identity, which massively benefits from from blockchain.
Joe, that was almost the perfect segue into the next panel, which is basically about features one project called Swash App, which is the world's first data union, collects browsing data from Brave and stuff like that. So, Joe, it's been a real pleasure to finally get that one-on-one with you. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much, Joe.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and share your feedback to help us reach as many people as possible with the important mission of Web3.